there, and you can shut out the moment that was so disturbing to you.
It is remarkable to me that you, Amy Tan, had to seek out this way of being in the moment, right? Because I always imagined writers as being the ones who could just of their own accord shut out all the noise so they could focus on the stories they were trying to bring to the rest of us. But apparently that's not true.
No, we do. But you know what we shut out is going to the story that's full of tension and drama and tragedy and difficulty and, all kinds of stuff. So we're there, and I can write for hours without being aware that time is going by. I could write till midnight. It takes my husband to say, time to go to bed. So yes, I can have that kind of concentration as a writer. And I think I've sort of always had it from childhood, trying to escape and being in the room by myself, reading or writing or drawing. But it's the same thing with drawing, only I'm not looking at it saying this is going to fail. It's going to be, they won't want to, everybody's going to laugh at me. Who I am, this just come to an end, existential angst, that wasn't there with drawing the birds, doing that kind of, it was play more than work.
Yeah. Well, I wasn't sure if I was going to ask this because it's kind of just a really gauche question, because it's the, pick your favorite child question.
Yeah.
But do you have a favorite or some favorite species?
It's changed over the years. It could be, and it could change by the day, because you'll see something very endearing that a bird does. A bird that lands on my hand spontaneously, like the pygmy nuthatch, because it's so impatient to get to the food. Or the hummingbird, because it would land on my hand. Or the oak titmouse, because he's such a little pipsqueak and he's scolding me, which is hilarious with his little crest up. But the recent one, I do have to say, is the owl, the great horned owl, because it is such a magnificent creature, and it was there every single day, right in front of me. I didn't even need binoculars to look at it. I'd look through the window and it would be there. And it was a little bit nerve-wracking because I have little dogs, and I had to kind of put netting around my porches where I'd let them out at night. But I got to see what they're like, and they sleep a lot during the day.
Well, Amy Tan, thank you so much for the gift of your book and for this conversation today. I can't thank you enough.
Thank you.
Amy Tan's new book is The Backyard Bird Chronicles. I'm Meghna Chakrabarty. This is On Point.
On Point is a production of WBUR Boston and is distributed by APM, American Public Media.
Support for On Point comes from the Museum of Science in Boston, dedicated to inspiring a lifelong love of science in everyone, in museums, classrooms, and online, offering engineering design challenges, digital experiences, live presentations, and more. MOS.org. And ZSP Media, co-creator of HBO's The Jinx, and WBUR, home of Last Seen, presenting a new podcast, Beyond All Repair, reinvestigating a cold case that will leave you questioning everything. Listen now.
Thank you for listening to KUOW Seattle, KUOW Tumwater, and KQOW Bellingham. We are just a few minutes away from this week's Week in Review, but here to give us a preview of today's show is Week in Review host Bill Radke.
Thank you so much. We're covering the week gone by. Washington state delegates to the Democratic National Convention are voting for Kamala Harris for president, but not unanimously. The Seattle City Council says defund is dead. Sending nude photos to your mayor can be an effective move. And why are people stealing our statues? Plus, we'll give you something to smile about as we do every week, so I hope you'll stay tuned for that.
Hi, I'm Kim Malcolm, local host of All Things Considered. You know it's important to feed your brain a variety of useful information, like getting today's biggest news stories in perspective and without the hype, thoughtful conversations with inspiring creatives, and for fun, the latest in music, art, and movies. Get it all in the most efficient way every weekday afternoon, starting at 3, here on KUOW.
NPR and local headlines coming up in a moment. Weather-wise, we've got a beautiful weekend in store. Sunny skies today and tomorrow with highs in the upper 70s, overnight lows in the upper 50s. Clouds moving in on Sunday with a chance of rain on Monday.
Support for KUOW comes from the Cottage Company's Thornton Creek Commons in Northeast Seattle's Olympic Hills neighborhood, with 9 new homes clustered on 2.5 acres, with a dog park, fire pit, meditation garden, and access to Thornton Creek. Open this Sunday from 2 to 4 and by appointment. More at cottagecompany.com.
And from Washington's Working Foresters, who manage, harvest, and replant Washington's working forests to provide a sustainable supply of carbon-friendly wood products. Learn more at workingforesters.org.
When you pick up your ballot to vote in Washington state, do you kind of feel like you're living in a video game on the highest difficulty setting?
Yeah, like some parts of the ballot feel like side quests you can't figure out. I'm KUOW politics reporter Scott Greenstone.
And I'm KUOW's Libby Denkman. And with our new podcast, Sound Politics, we're going to help you level up and get caught up on your ballot and beyond.
Listen to Sound Politics on the KUOW app or wherever you get your podcasts.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Lakshmi Singh. Former President and GOP presidential nominee Donald Trump has hosted Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu at his Mar-a-Lago resort in South Florida. NPR's Franco Ordonez reports on their efforts to ease tensions and rekindle an alliance ahead of the 2024 election.
The former president and current GOP nominee has been critical of the prime minister's handling of the conflict in Gaza ever since the October 7th attack on Israel. But sitting across from Netanyahu, Trump sought to highlight his support for Israel. And he touted his decision when in the White House to move the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem.
We've had a good relationship. I've always very good to Israel, better than any president's ever been.
The visit follows meetings Netanyahu had with President Biden and Vice President Harris. Harris, who is likely to run against Trump for the presidency, forcefully called on Israel to seek a ceasefire and end the war in Gaza. Trump called Harris's remarks toward Israel disrespectful. Franco Ordonez, NPR News.
Well, Vice President Harris's presidential campaign's picked up another high-profile endorsement from former President Barack Obama.
We called to say Michelle and I couldn't be prouder to endorse you and to do everything we can to get you through this election and into the Oval Office.
Oh my goodness. Michelle, Barack, this means so much to me. I am looking forward to doing this with the two of you, Doug and I both, and getting out there, being on the road.
Harris's campaign released video of the Obamas declaring support for her presidential nomination. The Democratic convention's next month. The umbrellas are out along the River Seine in Paris, which is lined with large crowds turning out for what could be a once-in-a-lifetime chance for a lot of people at watching the opening ceremony of the Olympics in person. Well, the closest Colorado resident, Sean Jones, will get to the event as through a screen from a fan zone in Hotel de Ville, but he still sounds like he hit the jackpot.
We got the tickets was a nightmare. Like a year and a half ago, we got into this lottery system and then luckily got picked. So we've had tickets for over a year now.
But as NPR's Eleanor Beardsley tells us, there's likely some trepidation about security hours after arson attacks on part of the country's high-speed rail system took place.
It's a psychological feeling because people are saying, oh my gosh, is this just a one-off or is this the beginning? This city for a week has been under lockdown. I mean, carved up with different security zones. You cannot get close to the river. You have to go through so many police barricades and checkpoints. And they have blocked off the ring road, the beltway. Cars cannot even come into the city now. They are closing the airspace in like a 90-mile perimeter.
That's NPR's Eleanor Beardsley. An investigation's underway into who was behind the attacks. There was no immediate claim of responsibility. You're listening to NPR News.
This is KUOW News. I'm Paige Browning in Seattle. Emergency officials are urging tourists and campers to stay away from the town of Stehekin in north central Washington as the nearby Pioneer Fire continues to grow. The Chelan County Emergency Management Office says about 130 people were evacuated via boat yesterday after fire bosses said they needed to leave as soon as possible. The fire's now burned nearly 32,000 acres near Lake Chelan since earlier this month. Employees of Homegrown, a local sandwich chain, are protesting the company's plans to close 10 of its 12 locations and lay off workers this September. Joshua McNichols has more.
I'm standing outside Homegrown Company headquarters, where the workers say the company's plans amount to union busting. That's because it's happening not long after they formed a union and negotiated a contract, earning them higher wages. In a statement, the company said rising food costs as well as labor costs drove the decision. The workers say they want severance pay and to see the company's books so they can understand the closures. Joshua McNichols, KUOW News.
Seattle Public Library has almost made a full recovery from the crippling cyber attack it had in May. As Sammy West reports, last week's global tech outage had a surprising effect on the library's system's road to recovery.
Despite the 1-2 punch of a ransomware attack over Memorial Day weekend, then the CrowdStrike software outage last week, library officials say all services should be back within 4 or 5 weeks. It's a bit of a surprise, considering that last week's tech outage caused Windows computers to crash across the globe. Charles Wesley is Seattle Public Library's technology officer. He said IT technicians had to visit all 27 SPL locations to bring desktop computers back online. But thanks to extra support from the city, Wesley said it only took 3 days, and it had a ripple effect.
But not only did this resolve the CrowdStrike outage, but it also further accelerated our recovery timelines for the cyber attack restoration.
A full report assessing the impacts of the ransomware attack is expected in September. Sammy West, KUOW News.
This is KUOW.
Support for NPR comes from Subaru, featuring the 2025 Subaru Outback Wilderness. With standard symmetrical all-wheel drive and all-terrain tires, it's designed for paths not yet taken. Learn more at Subaru.com/wilderness.
Welcome to Friday. Welcome to KUOW's Week in Review, the Giddy Democrat edition. My name is Bill Radke. I'm here with the stranger editor, Rich Smith. Hey, Rich.
Hey, how you doing, Bill?
GeekWire contributing editor, Mike Lewis. Hi, Mike.
Hey, Bill.
And from the Seattle Nice podcast, political and public affairs consultant, Sandeep Kaushik. Good to see you.
Yeah, thank you for having me on.
Thanks, everybody. Let's make sure his microphone is on. And you don't have to just listen to us through the microphones. You can watch the program live on YouTube. It's streaming there now. Just search for KUOW. Let's get at what happened this week. Washington State's Democratic National Delegates yesterday endorsed Vice President Kamala Harris for president. How many votes would you guess she got out of 135 delegates?
135.
96 votes for Harris, 17 against Harris. 39 delegates either did not join the meeting or chose not to vote. So I count that as 59% of the delegates voting for Harris. Does not mean they won't all vote for Harris. Eventually, there's a pre-convention roll call vote in a week and a half, and then the official vote at the convention. But the state Republican Party chair, Jim Walsh, says the Democratic Party is being undemocratic, and it should open next month's convention to a debate and contest among all interested candidates.
It really underlies the left's arguments about protecting our democracy when they are acting in an oligarchic and elite process to replace a presidential candidate.
I have not yet heard of people who want to oppose Harris and just are not allowed to. What's your reaction to this week's events?
I mean, I don't think that it's a oligarchic process or any more elite than the Republican primary process, which is the same. I mean, I don't think anybody's being disenfranchised here. Kamala Harris was on the ticket with Joe Biden. People voted for him and her. And according to a New York Times poll came out yesterday, 88% of Americans think it's the right idea that Biden stepped aside. So it seems like, primary.
Not a lot of disenfranchisement out there.
Yeah, not in my view, no.
Yeah, I totally agree with her. First of all, Democrats,
we're not really looking for advice on this from Jim Walsh and the MAGA folks. And that's the reality here. This is sort of grade Z spin coming mostly out of disingenuous Republican Party people who are trying to sow, dissension and kind of create a controversy where one doesn't really exist. To Richard's point, yeah, Democrats are already consolidating behind Kamala Harris. Look at the surge of fundraising, grassroots fundraising, $130 million, small dollar donations in just a few days. All signs are that, Democrats generally are happy that Joe Biden made the decision to step aside.
Thrilled, I would say.
Yeah, I'm count me in those ranks, and I think it was the right thing for him to do. And no, I don't think there's some terrible, anti-democratic act that's happened here.
And on top of that, the party's own rules sort of presuppose this. I mean, they're built to do this, to slot in the number 2 person right away, move the delegates over. It makes it much easier for everyone rather than going wide open at the convention. So I don't know. I mean, they're going to have to say something about it. So they said something. It's going to die pretty quickly and then move on.
All of our Washington State's Democratic congressional members have endorsed Harris, except, I believe, Marie Gluesenkamp Perez. In fact, she just signed on to a resolution criticizing Vice President Harris over her handling of the border. I believe she's in a closely contested reelection campaign in a swing district.
That's exactly what it sounds like to me. She's got to do what she's got to do to survive, to keep that district in Democratic hands. And, if I think that decision sort of acknowledges, maybe the more conservative people in her district's skepticism of Kamala Harris and gives her a little space before ultimately, I assume, she gets in line and supports her. But, she wants to, it sounds like, put up a little, stink beforehand.
Yeah, and I think the party gives her a lot of room to freelance because they know that how close that district is, that she's going to have to step outside the party norms on a whole bunch of issues just if she wants to keep her seat.
Yeah, I'll just point out, I did Marie's race last time. I'm not involved this time, but it's not even really a swing district. It is a red district, right? It is a district that Trump won. It's
swung. It's a non-swing district that swung.
Yeah. It was the most kind of surprising or biggest upset win of the last election cycle that Marie won that race, and so she's got a very good ear for her own constituents.
How is her polling looking at this point?
It's a very, very close toss-up kind of race. There was some public polling out recently that had Joe Kent, who is extreme MAGA Republican, and who she ran against last time and is running again.
Extremely good looking.
That he had a 1-point lead. In the
which means it's column, right?
Yeah. Call it. Yeah. You pick it.
Yeah.
Is it amazing to you how quickly some Democrats have gone from talking about Vice President Harris, I think affectionately, and yet also, I wish she were more popular, to just savior of the party?
This is the power of memes. I remember that night. I remember the night on Twitter when we all decided, when the Bernie Bros and the K-Hive all at once in a,
you're interlocking
moment.
your
I'm
arms.
interlocking my arms and doing the Roman handshake. We all knew what had to happen. Biden had to step aside. Kamala was the only person who made any sense. And then we were like, yeah, all right, that makes sense. Let's do that. Anybody with any sense, saw that as the right move. And we've got the system to do it, so why not do it? Take that risk and feel giddy and hope rather than all the doom that we were feeling beforehand. So I think that the memes helped turning her kind of semi-awkwardness in some public sphere moments as a benefit or a fun character trait.
Listen, for listeners who are not up on memes, and we have a few, it has been fascinating to watch this sort of iconography and the reclaiming of when she was mocked, when Vice President Harris was mocked for her laugh or the way she put sentences together and sort of quasi-philosophical cones that she repeat. It's it seems like, and I don't, maybe this is just the circles, my news feeds, but it seems like it's been really turned into a positive.
Oh yeah, I think so. Look, I mean, it's the power of social media. I mean, I didn't get invited to the secret ritual that Rich was at, where this decision got made. Unfortunately, I'm feeling a little left out by that. But no, I think there's been an enormous outpouring of excitement and energy, right, that came out of this decision. I think because people on the Democratic side were feeling like this race was slipping away, and that we were facing the prospect of 4 more years of Trump and all that implies. And so I think all of that pent up energy is coming out in the form of, on social media and the forms of media, and it's contagious, right? I mean, you get caught up in that excitement. I feel it.
Yeah. Well, and also you've got a woman at the top of the ticket, which I think has engendered a lot of energy. But remember this, I don't know that people felt it was I think people felt it was slipping away the moment Biden announced he was going to run again. I mean, I think the implicit deal was that you're one term, you're here to steady the ship, and then you're going to move aside. And then when he didn't, I think at most people were lukewarm. That was the hottest anyone got about it. Yeah. And then it became colder after that. And I think as time went on, and especially after that debate, like the energy went completely out of the system. So I'm not saying anyone would have engendered this much support. She's interesting. She's really interesting. But I think this was such a smart move, a gutsy and smart move by the Democrats.
But in retrospect, it's almost as if you couldn't have engineered it better for Biden to announce, for people to be deflated, for Biden to have a horrible, disastrous debate. It's in retrospect, everything we'll see. Right? It's like a few days in. So
I have zero doubt that there's a conspiracy theory exactly on that somewhere on Reddit.
And then for him to hang on as long as he did after the debate, and it turned into this kind of soap opera, King Lear, kind of like, and so for him to kind of make the decision to step aside, it's like, there's just this huge sort of dam of emotion that burst. Yeah. Right? Yeah.
I have a question. Narratively, it's like in the last quarter, and like they can just take the reins of the narrative, and then now the narrative doesn't climax until the election day, whereas Trump had the narrative before, especially with the assassination attempt, especially with the sort of like, all the giddiness from the RNC convention. And then, such a smart move to, I think, just take back that narrative in the soap opera.
I will very quickly say this, because we'll see. There's a long time between now and November, and we'll see how Kamala Harris fares over the course of that campaign. I mean, there are, for me, wearing my political sort of strategist hat, there are things to be kind of, that are worrisome about her past performance when she ran for president in 2019. There are things that I thought were pretty bad about how that campaign went and how she presented herself. So I'm feeling a lot better for how she's doing in the early stages here. But, she has some vulnerabilities. So we'll see how it plays out. And they're going to go after her on all that. So we'll see how it plays out over time. But there was no question that at least now it feels like we have a better chance on the Democratic side of being successful in this very, very consequential election than we were, in the days after the debate.
Absolutely.
By the way, we did have a Republican booked on today's show who backed out, was not able to make it, and so this thus titling today's episode "Giddy Democrats."
I'll try to pretend to be a little more Republican. As we go on.
You're the closest we got today.
Yeah.
I've heard every white Democratic governor in America named as a possible vice presidential nominee. How come nobody is saying Jay Inslee? I know we're not a swing state, but I'm hearing Gavin Newsom's not in a swing state either. Jay Inslee he just ran for president.
That's why. We're not in a swing state, He's a great, he's an athletic guy, he's a jock as a vibe, but obviously they need some Midwestern or Rust Belt.
So why the Gavin Newsom love, and where's the Jay Inslee?
Well,
I haven't heard his name once except for me right now saying it.
I will. So some of these folks like Gavin Newsom or J.B. Pritzker had kind of been almost quasi-running, right? And before Biden made his announcement that he was going to actually run for a second term, they were kind of gearing up to position themselves. So they were already sort of had injected themselves into the mix of this conversation.
Yeah.
I actually don't think any of those folks are. I'd be very surprised if Kamala picks any of those kinds of folks. I think it is going to be somebody from at least some sort of swing state, one of those governors. And so I don't think Gavin Newsom's very high on the list, but his name's out there because he put his name out there.
Okay.
I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, I mean, the two leaders, I think, are likely to be Mark Kelly and Josh Shapiro. And I think that both of them are pretty different than Jay Inslee.
By the way,
I mean,
to listeners, that's Arizona Senator Mark Kelly
and Pennsylvania Governor
Josh Shapiro.
And I think that both of them are definitely more to the center. They have to be than Jay Inslee. I don't know. I can't see Jay Inslee as being anything but a massive liability ticket. I don't know. I can completely understand why they wouldn't select, and that's no animosity toward Governor Inslee. It is just that he is perceived nationally as sort of a leader on the environment, but pretty far left.
Yeah,
and right. So I just can't see the Democrats in any way embracing something like that.
When Jay,
well, that changes starting now because he's in the conversation now.
Well, that's right. You are a kingmaker.
You put him there. Now, when Jay Inslee ran for president a few years ago, right? He really ran. He didn't run your standard, like, I'm a governor and an outsider to D.C., kind of, what Bill Clinton did in 1992. He really ran a cause campaign, right? And he wanted to raise attention about a set of environmental concerns that he's incredibly passionate about. That's what he used the vehicle of that presidential campaign for. I think even though it's not going to get you elected president doing that, I think he came out of that campaign with enhanced reputation.
In Washington State.
Yeah, and among Democrats in D.C. is, hey, here's a guy who was really genuine about his commitment to climate change action.
The argument had been, though, as I understood it, was that he was sort of running for a cabinet position more than he was running for president.
Maybe, I mean, I think he was running for president. I mean, I think he wanted to be president, but Joe Biden had sort of talked about Jay Inslee as in the second term potentially being a kind of cabinet sort of appointee, right? And before he stepped aside. So I wouldn't rule anything out.
I have one more fall ballot question here coming out of this week's events. What do you think if Democrats and maybe independents, I don't know, anybody who's more engaged, I guess pro Harris or anti-Harris, anybody who's more engaged in Washington State, does that new energy, new dynamic in this campaign change the turnout in other campaigns, other issues in Washington State?
It very well could. Yeah.
Who does this bring to the Washington State ballot? Who's filling out their ballot in November who maybe wasn't going to before or is going to switch?
I think it was pretty clear from the polling that particularly younger voters, some voters of color, were not super excited, even less excited than your average Democrats about coming out and voting for Joe Biden. I think Kamala Harris does much better with those constituencies. So I think we could see greater turnout on the kind of progressive or Democratic side of the ledger, and that could have some significant down ballot impacts, particularly on these conservative initiatives that are on the ballot, right? That could,
initiatives to repeal some Washington State laws.
Yeah, I'm working on those, so I should disclose that, but on the no side of those. But yeah, I think it could have an impact.
I have two friends with college-age kids, both of whom said they didn't hear anything from their kids regarding the election until this moment. Like then they started talking about it. So I'm guessing that you're entirely correct, that there's no downside for young voters and potentially a tremendous upside.
Yeah. The people for whom Gaza is a main issue, I think will still, try to hold Harris's feet to the fire on that. I don't know. I don't know if that means they won't vote. So yeah, I think it's there's no loss there.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's kind of do we cover it? That's like a wrap on so far Washington State effects of the Biden to Harris switch.
We're coconut pilled, just like every other Democratic state.
Know your meme. We are coconut pilled. It is brat summer, etc. And yeah, we just fell out of a coconut tree. So we were just talking about how the governor of California, Gavin Newsom, has kept himself in the national conversation, even though nobody really thinks he's going to be the vice presidential choice. This week, Governor Newsom directed his California state agencies to clear what he called dangerous homeless encampments from state land. His executive order gives local governments the authority to do the same. This comes a month after the Supreme Court allowed cities to enforce bans on sleeping outside in public spaces, even if there's no shelter space available. In response to Governor Newsom's move, Washington governor candidate Republican Dave Reichert tweeted, quote, Governor Inslee, SCOTUS, that's the Supreme Court, made it crystal clear. You can clean up our streets. What's the holdup? So why did California do this, and what will Washington do next?
I don't think there's a downside for Governor Newsom doing this. I mean, he's not going to. There's not a group of people except maybe activists who are going to depart from him in California. He's relatively popular there. So why not throw this out there? And it's also a fairly limited scope, right?
Yeah.
This doesn't extend to every city, everywhere. This extends, I think, to state lands, if I remember correctly. Yeah. So, I don't know. I don't see a downside. I don't think Inslee in Washington, if that's the question, is going to do anything. Why? Right. I mean, he's got Ferguson to worry about, right? And the Attorney General who is running for governor. He's not going to do anything to make it harder on him, especially because this is what Dave Reichert is looking for. Is some response.
Yeah, first of all, if we want to talk about what Governor Inslee is going to do, first of all, WashDOT, right, the state transportation agency, already has a program to work on clearing encampments in under I-5 or in I-paths. They work with PDA, which is an organization here in Seattle that used to be Public Defender Association, is now called Purpose Dignity Action, to do outreach to those encampments and to try to work with the people there and to clear those encampments. So and again, even in California, I'm not sure Governor Newsom's order or declaration, whatever you want to call it, really did a whole lot or changed much in the way of policy. I think it was really more about, as we were saying before, Governor Newsom's political ambitions and his desire to be more successful on a national stage, and he's sort of teeing himself up. I do think this kind of shows you where the electorate is at, even in blue states, on things like encampment policy, where I don't think the position that the left has taken in recent years of quote unquote no sweeps exclamation point is a politically viable position to hold anymore. And I think we're seeing that from kind of blue state politicians. I mean, the Supreme Court case, right, that made that ruling, you had the mayor of San Francisco, right, the governor of California, the city attorney here in Seattle, all weighing in that case on the side of give us more authority to clean up encampments.
Right, Republican city attorney here in Seattle. But yeah, I mean, like, to put it more sharply, it is extremely popular not to like the way poor people look. And Gavin Newsom is taking that position boldly. And, maybe he's doing it in part to help out Harris, another California politician who the right is going to. I mean, you just know the ads are coming with, some encampments in Skid Row or whatever. Like, this is Kamala's California. She's going to turn the rest of the United States into this or whatever. So maybe he's trying to get ahead of that now. And just to piggyback on Sandeep's point, yeah, Governor Inslee's got the sweep slush fund. The legislature has filled it up the last couple of years. And the mayor of Seattle, when we asked if, Grants Pass is going to do anything to change the way he's operating, said no, because he's sweeping plenty. He's sweeping every day. Last year he swept, 2,200 encampments. That's up several 100% from the 900 it was the year before. So we're going to continue to push people around and disrupt communities and throw away their IDs and everything, and nothing will change. It'll be incredibly expensive and not very useful to anybody, and only immiserate people more and cause more pain. But people on their way to work might see fewer encampments sometimes. These people don't go anywhere. They've got nowhere to go. We don't have any houses or shelters to put them in. Until we do, it's not going to work.
I agree with the last part of that, is that we need, and pretty much disagree with everything else Rich said about it. I mean, look, the policy of encampment cleanups is rooted in something real that's more about people don't want to see homeless people. And that's the kind of talking point on the left that I think is just not actually true, right? I mean, look, when this mayor came into office in 2021, right, he had a press conference, right, about crime. Remember when crime first kind of erupted as an issue? And one of the things that they pointed to was there had been a massive increase in shootings in encampments, 122% increase in 2020, because they had stopped cleaning up encampments entirely. Now, that level of gun violence that's encampment related has gone way down, and I don't think it's coincidental that it's tied to the fact that they're doing more of these, whether you want to call them sweeps or cleanups or whatever, and the reason for this is because we've known since the 60s that when you concentrate poverty and social dysfunction into pockets of places, right, when we built those huge towers, right, Cabrini Green in Chicago was the classic example of this, the problems that every individual in those situations were already facing got worse, right? And that's what happens in encampments when some of them, when they grow and metastasize into kind of nodes of problem behaviors, right? And sometimes the alternative, while not great, of sweeping them is better than letting them kind of fester and become places where bad things happen.
And the problem with some of the sweeps, sort of to cut some space between the two of you, is that they were very indiscriminate. I mean, so to the extent that they're solving crime problems is great, but to the extent that they're getting rid of like the last few connections people have to actually being able to stabilize their existence wasn't. And they did a lot of that as well.
And where I don't disagree with Rich at all is we need way more investment in places for people to go, right? If we want to get people out of encampments permanently, at the end of the day, you've got to offer better shelter, more housing options, all of those things.
But you're not waiting. You're not waiting for that to come, though.
It's difficult to get the money to do that when you're spending a lot of it on clearing encampments. I mean, you pointed to one statistic to support the points that clearing encampments led to a reduction in gun violence. I don't know if that's true or not. I know that other statistics suggest that it's not that great to keep clearing encampments, and ODs are up, other sorts of crimes are up, and, you talk to the people, they don't really like being pushed around. And the problem that you're trying to solve is if you don't want people outside, then why are you just pushing them around? Another approach, which we haven't really done that much of to scale, is servicing those encampments, at scale, while we build more shelter and housing for them. Now, we'd have to tax people to get the money to build that housing, and so that's related. It all ultimately goes back to that.
Okay, I got to pause there as we're digesting and commenting on this week's News Gone By on KUOW's Week in Review. You're listening there to Rich Smith and Sandeep Kaushik and Mike Lewis. I'm Bill Radke. You can watch this show on YouTube right now if you like. We're going to pause and come right, since we're talking about the West Coast turning more, quote-unquote, law and order. Let's pick up on that theme in another way when we return on Week in Review.
Support for KUOW comes from Third Place Books. Sci-fi duo James S.A. Corey launched the first book in a new series, The Mercy of the Gods, Saturday, August 10th at 7 p.m. Tickets available now at thirdplacebooks.com.
And from Legacy Forest Defense Coalition, with a mission to protect Western Washington's oldest remaining lowland forests. Learn how the coalition's legal efforts are helping to protect and conserve natural heritage at WLFDC.org.
Hi, I'm Chris Morgan, host of The Wild. Fear. It's in all of us. It's a survival mechanism that has helped keep our ancestors alive. We wouldn't be here without it. On our next episode, we learn how a researcher is trying to better understand this emotion by looking to marmots. What can we discover about the feelings of wild animals that will help us comprehend our own emotions? Listen to The Wild tonight at 8 or anytime on the KUOW app.
Okay, team. You're listening to KUOW's Week in Review. I'm Bill Radke, and we've got Mike Lewis and Sandeep Kaushik and Rich Smith here. And, okay, here's a question. Topic number 2, 3, what are we up to on the Week in Review? My question is, now is Seattle cop friendly enough? This week, some city council members said we need to arrest more people. The mayor is, according to the Seattle Times, thinking of sending arrestees to a jail in Des Moines because King County is not booking enough people downtown. Council member Rob Saka blamed the old guard.
The public safety challenges that we're experiencing today are a shameful legacy of the defund the police movement. And that was wrong then, it's wrong now. And, from my perspective, defund is dead.
The defund is dead attitude pleases the new interim police chief.
Your message has been crystal clear to me, and I've been able to convey that message to the frontline officers that we have the support of this council. It's a little bit of a new message for them. They're very, very happy to hear that.
Interim Police Chief Sue Rahr there. Sandeep, is Seattle yet another West Coast city that has become pro-police?
Well, I mean, certainly the current council is, and current mayor are way more invested in, public safety issues, addressing those, recruiting more cops, those sorts of things than the previous council. I do think there's a big political sea change that's happened there, right? But it's worth kind of talking about the context here of where we're at in terms. First of all, we're down 400 plus officers from where they would want to be. That's a huge number. And on any given night, when you call 911, there are 4 priorities of calls. Like, the only one you're really sure you're going to get a response on is priority 1 calls, which are like, threat of actual, harm or violence is going to occur. Even priority 2 calls, which are pretty serious calls, sometimes go unanswered for hours because they have a lack of manpower.
But Seattle has this brand new care team of unarmed behavioral health specialists who, that's their mission, isn't it, is to go to 911 calls that are deemed not, a lot of those 911 calls are not violent or not emergencies. So that's what they're there for, is to be a 911 response to so-called safer
sort
calls?
of. They're a co-responder, so the cops go to the call, even if it's a priority 4 call, and they've got a little social worker with them. And if the cops want the social worker, if they clear the scene and think the social worker can handle it or whatever, then they go off and leave. So I guess the idea is to save about 15 minutes of time or whatever for patrol. Not particularly interesting idea to me. And of course, for that to work, even that, time-saving device, they would have to actually use them. When we reported on it a couple of months ago, the cops weren't employing the care team. They were kind of sitting in their cars for 8 hours a day, not doing much. And it's because that the cops know if you stand up, something that could look like an alternative, maybe if you turn it sideways, then that means that they are at a less power at the bargaining table when it comes to getting higher salaries when they're doing contracts and stuff. They don't want alternatives because that's a threat to their jobs. They want 400 more cops. They don't want, oh gosh, we can't hire 400 more cops because there's a national police shortage, and so probably we should try to find other ways to meet those service needs. They don't want to hear that because they don't super care about public safety as much as they care about their jobs, in my view.
So I'm not sure I go all the way down that road with you, but I actually don't disagree with you. The fact that I read the reporting that you folks did on that, and I think it was very interesting that they were not utilizing what was supposed to be. I mean, remember, if you go back just a few years, the police themselves were making the argument that we're not social workers. And there's a bunch of calls that we would rather not go on, that we should. And so then when the council, and I didn't agree with the defund the police movement, for one simple logistical reason, they actually couldn't. They were under contract to pay people. You can't just do that. But I would say that they wanted this. The council called them on that bad, and then suddenly they didn't want this. And remember, they also with parking tickets as well. How long did that last with Seattle Department of Transportation? A month, 2 months, something like that, before they shifted them.
This was taking parking tickets away from the SPD.
And so it was performative and silly.
It was very performative and silly and wasted a lot of money. And so it would be nice if for once the police stated what they wanted. They did get their additional money, quite a bit of additional money, and I think that they got
a big pay raise.
Absolutely. And one of the things that people aren't talking about is how expensive it is to live in Seattle. Many of the police don't live here anyway. And why not take, if you get $10,000 less at a smaller agency or $20,000 a year, but your cost of living goes way down and you can afford to buy a house, you're going to jump. And that's what happened with many of them. I mean, I know that there were people unhappy, officers who were justifiably unhappy about the defund the police movement and feeling not supported by the council. I understand that. But there was a whole bunch of other things happening in other cities where fewer cops were being hired that did not have a defund. And so what was happening there?
Right. The police shortage, it is a national problem.
It's a national problem.
There's a lot of structural things that were at play. It didn't help that you had the city. And when you looked at the exit interviews of cops exiting in 2020 and 2021, there was a very high percentage of them that cited the fact that the city council is, says that we're evil and blah 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 and sort of. So I don't think.
Of course they will, though.
Yeah,
It is easy to say.
Sure,
look, they are Republicans. They are conservative. Cops, by and large, are Republicans and conservatives, and the people who have their budgets are their political enemies. And we like to pretend that the police is like a nonpartisan, non-political actors, but they're just as political as any other department. They are just as political as any other person, and we should recognize that if they're throwing stones at the council and saying it's really this defund movement that's making me want to live out in Snohomish and have an easy, a cake job being a cop at Snohomish or in Bellevue and not, babysitting people I don't like in Seattle, as they derisively say in their exit interviews, then we are lying to ourselves. So I just think that I don't think that we can really trust the defund movement. Look, it's hurting my feelings.
Every single member of the current city council none of them are Republicans.
That's
right?
true.
Right. And I think the tone has changed. And what you're hearing from interim police chief Rahr is that the message that's getting in the rank and file, that it's a much more productive message. Look, I think the defund thing, I've been on the record saying that I think the Seattle left and large portions of the media along with them basically lost their minds in 2020, and they went off in some really counterproductive directions. And I actually think defund not only ended up being kind of performative and unattainable, but it also set back the cause of what's really important, which was police reform efforts, right? Because we do have cultural issues with police, right? In a progressive city like Seattle, there are tensions about how, within SPD, about what kind of culture we have, how do we intersect with the public, how do we deal with that? And so there needs to be those kinds of cultural reform efforts on an ongoing basis. That all stuff, I think, all got derailed in this really dumb and
Cultural reform, you mean please stop being abusive? Is that, what are you referring to?
Yeah. When you have dynamics in the department, like we just had recently with the officer who's the vice second in command in the police guild, who was making these very disparaging comments privately to the union chief about the young woman who was killed.
Run down in the crosswalk.
One guy just got fired for Asian slurs.
That's incredibly inappropriate and over the top, and that shouldn't be happening, right? I mean, that's a culture problem.
Mike, anything to add? We cover it?
Well, mostly. I would also say, though, that I think that one of the issues about funding the police or the defunding the police, I think that wasn't. So I don't understand why the conversation didn't go back then, and I was making this argument back then on KUOW Radio, is why didn't we ever go back to an assessment of actual police training? Because it feels to me like if you read any of the like in-depth studies on police training, like it's changed. It's changed fairly radically over the last 20 years, and some of it has to do with like the level of aggression, the militarization of the police. Some of that is just a pure training issue. And that was never discussed, because I think that the defund the police was a reaction to tension in the community, although weirdly enough, oftentimes defund was the least popular in the lowest income neighborhoods, because they wanted to see more police, not fewer police.
So retrain the police would have been a better slogan.
Or maybe just an honest assessment of how police training happens now as opposed to how it used to happen. And I think there's probably some improvements, but I've been told that there are some that are definitely very different than it used to be.
We're also not talking about policing staffing per capita, right? I mean, we're just talking about sheer numbers of police officers. And I think if you look at the per capita amount, we have about the same number of police officers per capita as we did 20 years ago or whatever. I don't think it's at all-time staffing levels per capita. I think.
How can that be if officers have gone down and our population's gone up?
What population has gone? I don't know. Population population was lower.
It's not per capita. We're at the same levels we were in 1990 in terms of the raw number of cops.
But it's not per capita.
Per capita, we're way down, right? Because the population of Seattle has grown enormously, right, since 1990 or whatever. So
my opening question was, is Seattle...
and then just one more thing is just that the crime has, despite the fact that we have had the lowest amount that we've ever had in our entire life, crime also went down last year. And so as the New York Times reports, there doesn't seem to be much correlation between the size of departments, the police budgets, and crime.
If you're not responding to crime, you're not counting that crime. You know, that could be that.
You have reports. People can report crime.
People
just
can
because
report
they don't
crimes, but
respond
if a
doesn't mean
police,
they're not
but if,
counting.
well,
does it?
but if you call for an officer and an officer does not show up and no one takes that report, do you then follow up and call the department and put in your own report? Frequently not.
I would have to double check to see how the police, what the police count whenever
Right.
they're sending those reports to the FBI, who collects that data, I think, but I'm not quite sure.
Well,
I do know that a lot of like stores and stuff stopped calling to report
That's
shoplifting
entirely it, right.
because they
There
weren't
was
gonna
no-
get
there was no response, right, so
we
they
did the
just didn't
first 10
bother
times we
reporting
did
it.
it, nothing happened.
Right,
We're not
right,
gonna
right.
like we're gonna
Okay,
stop calling. There's a lot of
just
it.
final to put a bow on this. My opening question was about how cop-friendly Seattle was and is and will be. So, just briefly, is there anything you expect that listeners can expect to see in the near future from the city of Seattle? Have we reset the Seattle attitude? The Seattle the union is happy with what the city council says, and the inner police chief. We've still got a police chief to come. Where are we at on this turn that seems to be happening in so many places on the West Coast toward quote unquote law and order?
Seems to be happening. It happened in 2021. It was quick. We had a racial reckoning and police violence reckoning in 2020. Immediately, Democrats went out against it after a year, and we have been living in this like we love the police world for the last 3 years.
Oh, I think it's way more mixed right now. I think it's still contested, right? Rich, and there's a bunch of, readers in the stranger audience who like, who don't think like,
in power.
Yeah, that cops are okay, or we should be adding more cops or whatever, right? And so it's a fluid situation. It's contested. And right now, the city council may be making nice noises about how police are important, but we're also in the midst of very difficult, drawn-out, contentious negotiations with the police union about getting some changes to the contract that would actually allow us to move forward on substantive reform, like the care teams. What one of the biggest bottlenecks for us doing an alternative, non-armed response
Was
is
the
police union.
MOU that the city signed, making sure that we're never going to have an alternative, in my life? I mean, we have given them everything.
Okay.
Hugest raises. We've given them bonuses. Like, it's more than just a nice noises. We have given them real cash money.
Bottom line, it's ridiculous that we have a care team that only responds to 2 incidents a day.
Hear, hear.
Other cities have done much better, both in standing up alternatives, but also in recruiting police. We're doing poorly on both fronts. So,
well, and we've also not had a whole lot of talent at the top of the police department, honestly.
And we'll see what happens at the top of the police
yeah.
department. Yeah, we've got to take a break, and after we do that, we'll come back with possibly effective nude photos. Although we've just seen them for the first time. I hadn't seen those before until I looked at Rich's phone.
Yeah.
Okay, more to say about that when we return on Week in Review.
I think it's
Hi, I'm Alex Rochester, the Digital Community Outreach Coordinator here at KUOW, one of the real human people who reads and replies to your questions and suggestions for stories. Help us give the auto-reply robots of the world a break.
Thanks.
And share your feedback and ideas at kuow.org/feedback.
Support for KUOW comes from the Recreational Boating Association of Washington, encouraging all who use Lake Union to mind the seaplane advisory zone. When yellow lights flash on the line of buoys, a seaplane is about to take off or land. Lake users are asked to move 200 feet away. More at mindthezone.org.
Hi, I'm KUOW's Libby Denkman.
And I'm KUOW politics reporter Scott Greenstone.
And we're the hosts of a new podcast. It's called Sound Politics.
We're here to help you understand the people, policies, and perspectives that shape the Pacific Northwest.
You can find Sound Politics on the KUOW app or wherever you get your podcasts.
GeekWire has sent you its contributing editor, Mike Lewis. The Stranger has dispatched editor Rich Smith.
Right.
Seattle Nice Podcast has... What's another word for
beamed me in?
Beamed in.
Deployed?
Deployed.
I like deployed. That's what I want. That's what I want. It has deployed Sandeep Kaushik, and I'm Bill Radke, hosting Week in Review. Next topic. What happens if you send the mayor nude photos? Seattle's Denny Blaine Park is an unofficial nude beach. Some neighbors don't like what goes on there. One of the neighbors, Stuart Sloan, owner of a big lakefront house and University Village, offered to anonymously donate money to build a children's play structure for the park. KUOW got hold of some text messages between Sloan and Seattle Mayor Bruce Harrell. In the spring of last year, Sloan texts, "Mr. Mayor, sorry about disturbing you over the weekend, but I thought you would be interested to see a couple of photos from this afternoon at Denny Blaine Park. I did take the liberty to black out the privates, but rest assured there were many today in the park. This is disgusting, and as you've said, we're on the right side of this issue. I hope you agree that we need to get ahead of this, or it will be more difficult once the good weather returns. Christopher has said that they're 2 weeks away from a plan. I hope that's true and that the plan can get put into action immediately thereafter." The mayor texted back that the deputy mayor would call Sloan, which she did within 10 minutes. Sloan called himself Harrell's new friend. 3 months later, Harrell texted Sloan, "If you are disgusted, I share your disgust. The deputy mayor will be working with you to address the issue, and I apologize it has not been done quickly and effectively. The law department pushed back on one strategy, but I am committed to figuring this out. I am assuming you are frustrated, and I think your frustration is very reasonable. I know you want results and not an apology, so I hope the latter is quickly forthcoming." Reaction.
Incredible. You gotta, the context of these texts. The mayor is on his anniversary vacation with his wife, and he is texting in Maui, and he is texting this rich man about the problem of nudity at a nude beach. He then follows up by text, en route to the G7. The man is on a plane. The mayor is on the plane, and what is he thinking about? Stuart Sloan's problem with nudity at Denny Blaine. It is incredible, in my view, indictment of the priorities of the mayor. If he, if the mayor has similar text with a trans nudist who frequents Denny Blaine because it's one of the few safe spaces queer people have in the city and go to for free, then our public records request did not pull that up. So it just shows kind of who he is most attentive to, and it gives you a window on his thoughts about nudity.
Look, optics-wise, this whole incident was not a great look for the 7th floor and for the mayor's office. I will say this: like, I've helped elect any number of now mayors in Seattle in recent years. People view the office of mayor, the public views the office of mayor differently than they do, say, like a U.S. senator or member of Congress, right? They're somebody that you typically go to with your, they're your neighbor. You can go to them with your local problems. There also can be, it makes people feel much more open about being very critical and even hostile towards mayors than they would be in a more formal office where there's more distance. So it's not weird to me that somebody's texting the mayor saying, "I've got this problem and I need you to, take action on it." That said, the kind of concierge level of reaction and service that happened here. I mean, it is not typical for a deputy mayor to make a house call like to someone's house when there's a problem, and so that that was eyebrow raising, and I think not a great reaction on the city's part. It would have been perfectly appropriate for the mayor to have pinged the parks director and said, "Is there a problem? You should go investigate, check it out."
I don't understand why people who know that you can file a public records request for their text messages don't write better text messages. It's never made any sense to me, because I mean, obviously he can respond and say, "I hear you're upset. We will look into this," and he doesn't have to say that I share your disgust. I mean, it seems kind of silly. I agree with you. The shows an odd set of priorities.
Regarding
for the mayor, but I wasn't terribly blown away that about the larger narrative. Rich guy has access, because that's politics in America.
People text the mayor all the time with "I saw this" or blah blah blah.
Yeah.
That's not super unusual.
Unusual.
That said, the response stood out.
Yes.
He doesn't respond to journalists with that level of attention
No?
and care. Yeah, exactly.
How
Certainly not. We have to go through someone else.
How many nude photos have you sent him?
Yeah.
I have not sent him any nude photos.
Now we know.
Speaking of the nude photos and the disgust, there's been speculation about what Sloan and the other neighbors are disgusted about. Speculation that, they don't like all the queer people at Denny Blaine, or if there's sex happening there, they don't like that it's queer people having sex. Sloan never mentions queerness in his text, just nudity, nor does he mention parking problems, which is one of the things people have talked about, or trash at the park, just the disgusting privates. What do we make of that?
How do you separate the dancer from the dance, Bill? You know, I mean, Sloan knows it's a queer nude beach. Bruce Harrell, who's from these streets, as he said, every single day of his mayoral campaign, should know that Denny Blaine is a queer nude beach. So you can't say that the nudity, you're only disgusted by the nudity. Those nude bodies are queer bodies, and you're disgusted by queer nude bodies.
But not,
so
but
you
not
can
exclusively.
say,
Not exclusively. And I think that it's not fair. I think that it's not fair. I hear what you're saying, and I don't necessarily strongly disagree with it, but I would say it's not fair to make that leap. He didn't say anything in the text like that. It could be just one of those people who is a little tightly wound about public nudity, regardless, because there are people at that beach who are not queer.
Sure.
And who are nude. And and he doesn't know, especially if you look at the photos, you have to squint to actually tell that people are nude in these photos.
You're going to be poring over the photos with a magnifying glass.
It was so much effort. It was so much effort to see the nudity.
But just to describe, it's just somebody's sunbathing and somebody's walking from here to there.
At a great distance. At a great distance.
I will say this. I think there's a much stronger case to be made for prudishness than homophobia, right?
I think that's fair.
But at the end of the day, if there's sort of lewd behavior and people actually having sex and doing that kind of stuff, I have more sympathy for complaining about that. If you're just complaining about there's some nude people, like 100 yards away or whatever, then
but he didn't
suck it up. Suck it up, right? I mean, you live in Seattle and whatever. Right?
Yeah, he did not send evidence of anybody having sex.
Right, and
No,
that's where I'm like, so why did there get this like all hands on deck concierge? That is, I think.
Okay, finally, my last question about this. Somebody who presumably likes Denny Blaine Beach the way it is, told The Stranger, I think I read this in The Stranger, quote, if they really can't stand having naked bodies near their multi-million-dollar fences, I'd be delighted to see the funding of a new, nicer, larger nude beach somewhere else in the city. And nudity is legal in the city. So my question is, should the city of Seattle officially designate someplace a nude beach? They don't currently. It's unofficial.
I mean,
Rich is giving me a I don't care shrug.
Yeah.
I mean, if they want it, why not?
Well, I'm asking you. Do you have any? Do you? None of you care. It's okay. It'll save us time if you don't care.
I don't think we should be taking away. I think Rich would agree with this. The Denny Blaine spot because there are some rich people that are being prudish about the nudity that happens there. So if that's the motive, that seems like a pretty bad motive to do it somewhere else. But if the motive, hey, we can find a better space, it's bigger and be easier access or whatever, then maybe, that would be cool. Like I have no problem with a nude beach.
Yeah,
right?
if the city wants to make designated nude beaches, as long as they're not saying you can't go to Denny Blaine anymore because the rich guy doesn't like it, that sounds great. And I think going back to the crime and broken window stuff from earlier, if the city did more proactive stuff like pay for people's broken windows, like pay Target for stolen whiskey or whatever, when an alcoholic comes in, steals some whiskey, sells it or drinks it or whatever, increases the broken windows funds that we already have, establishes restitution funds that we could have, then a lot more people would feel a lot better about waiting for housing and shelter and stuff to come online so we can get people help. And I think it'd be a lot cheaper to do that than to use the prison system and cops and lawyers and everything else just to prosecute somebody for that kind of behavior. And so I think that applies here.
This case throwing trash at Denny Blaine or whatever, what have you.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, the playground move, the playground donation move was just talk about naked. Like the ambition there was absolutely naked.
Was
right?
nude.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely.
All right. Well, we'll see. So what's the status? Sounds like the playground is nixed. So everything. So has everything settled out? There's not going to be a. I'm not hearing a groundswell of support for moving the official nude beach around the city or
it's been that for how many
redesignating
years
it.
now? I mean, it's
20, 30 years.
And I imagine that if we went through the whole history, pretexting the whole history of the public reaction, the neighbor reaction to that, there is going to be one rich person every couple of years who is going to move into the neighborhood and be like,
Yeah.
I don't like this.
Yeah.
Let's get it stopped, and then it doesn't get stopped. The city sort of just slow walks it a bit, and then moves on to the next subject, which is exactly what should happen here.
Okay.
In the last last 5 years, I think there's been 8 or 18 complaints or something, a handful of complaints about that kind of stuff, trash, lewd behavior,
And
that
it's
kind of
not
thing.
just in that park; in a variety of parks.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay,
so it's not a
finally,
big problem.
we're just at the end of the show, so I want to make sure that listeners get something to smile about, which doesn't always happen in the news. Anything making you happy, pleased?
I've just been really happy with the Stranger staff recently and
Yeah.
working with them. You know, it's been stressful because of the elections and everything, and I've just been so proud to be working with them. Yeah.
Strangers holding up.
Strangers holding up.
Yeah.
I'd say the one thing that I didn't realize this, but it did make me smile, was I didn't know that this is the first Olympics in history, I guess in the 100 years or so, that has male-female athlete parity. I didn't realize that this is the first time it's
The
happened.
same number of female as male athletes?
Yeah, which was shot. I always assumed it did,
Yeah.
all the way through, and I realized this is the first actual Olympics where we got there. So I think that's great.
Parity
Hoorah.
achieved. Sandeep, anything else?
I mean, this is just a sign that I've gotten old, but like, I actually spent more than an hour this week trying to, as we were talking earlier about the Kamala Harris, the memes, and I was sitting there on the internet like, what is this Kamala Harris brat thing? Or like, what is a coca? And I'm like, oh, there's a CNN article. Let me read that. So, and I kind of realized what I'm doing and start laughing at myself. So that's what made me laugh, is that I've reached this point where I'm constantly trying to play catch up with our shifting,
Okay.
talk to a girl. What is that?
That is our time. That was Charlie XCX's newest fan, Sandeep Kaushik from Seattle Nice Podcast. GeekWire's Mike Lewis and The Stranger's Rich Smith. I'm Bill Radke. Week in Reviews produced by Kevin Kniestat. Running the board is Kathy Faulkner. Thanks, everybody, and we'll see you next week. Thank you.
Thanks.
Support for KUOW comes from Archbright, offering virtual and in-person training on supervision, management, communication, and collaboration. Available for individual enrollment or as private team trainings.